I'm Rob Neugebauern. I'm the Dean of Students and Alumni Affairs for the Division of Continuing Education, and it's my honor, on behalf of the Harvard Extension School and the Harvard Graduate School of Education, to welcome you to tonight's event. Tonight's event is entitled The Overview Effect: Astronauts' Unique View from Space and What We Can All Learn from It. It was December 7th, 1972, when astronauts aboard Apollo 17 took this iconic photo known as the Blue Marble. And tonight, 40 years later, we will reflect on that moment and how it has changed the world and how it has changed the way we think about the world. Tonight's event is part of the Free Think at Harvard series and is being live streamed via the web to viewers around the world. I want to acknowledge the Harvard Alumni Association and HAA clubs, including clubs across South America and in Toronto. I think there were a few others I was supposed to mention that are joining us live tonight via the web. We have a great program ahead, and I'll be brief, but I want to take a moment to thank our friends and colleagues here at the Ed School. Is Liz Thurston here? Oh, Liz, way in the... Thank you. All of us who've worked on this event are very happy to be sharing what we think is some very interesting content with you all, but we're probably equally happy about having shared the work of bringing this content to you tonight. Harvard has been a very siloed terrain, but the president has called for new unity under the banner One Harvard. And in keeping with tonight's theme, I think it's worth noting that when seen from space, there are no borders, not even between Harvard schools. So I want to thank again Liz and her whole group here for being such great partners on tonight's event. Our program will begin with some welcoming remarks by our moderator. Then we will see a short film, the world premiere of Overview. After that, we'll hear from our panelists, and then we'll open the floor to questions from the audience, both live and online. Those watching online to participate on Twitter, tell you where I'm at. Use the hashtag Overview. To post questions on Facebook, visit the Harvard Extension Alumni Association page at facebook.com/HarvardEXTAA. Please mention your location and any Harvard affiliation when you do connect with us. It's a real pleasure for me to introduce tonight's moderator. Frank White is Director of Communications for Alumni Relations at the Harvard Kennedy School. He's already retired from a significant post here at University Alumni Affairs and Development, and he teaches at the Extension School, which is how I've gotten to know him. He's a graduate of the college and a Rhodes Scholar, the author of several books on space exploration and climate change, including the 1987 The Overview Effect: Space Exploration and Human Evolution, and he's clearly been thinking way ahead of the rest of us for a very long time. Please welcome Frank White.
Well, thank you, Rob, and I also want to take a moment just to thank Rob and Liz and the incredible team that has been working on this event. You know, there are a couple of extraordinary things about this. One is we have Harvard schools working together. The Overview Effect has actually had an impact on Harvard, but also this event came together in about a month. And for a 375-year-old institution, we moved extremely fast. So something is going on here, and it's something that is good. If I could start by just speaking personally for a moment, I'd like to say, except for my family, especially my wife Donna, who regrettably cannot be here tonight, but's been a great supporter of my work, I've had two great passions in my life. One has been Harvard University. I have been involved in many aspects of Harvard life, especially being a member of the Harvard class of 1966, and also being an extension school instructor. The other great passion has been space exploration and the Overview Effect. It is wonderful for me, and I want to thank all of you for being here. It is wonderful to share with you these two important aspects of our life on Earth coming together. I do believe it's a very powerful combination, potentially, and we're all a part of it. So having said that, I'd like to talk very briefly to you about the overview effect. As Rob said, I'm the author of the book, The Overview Effect, Space Exploration and Human Evolution. As you'll see in the film, I had the idea for the book and for the concept while flying cross-country about 35 years ago. And for 35 years, I have been trying to find the best way to communicate the astronaut experiences. And it's remarkable to see the history of how an idea comes into being and how it enters into different media. So tonight, we have the evolution of an idea from a book to a film. And I think we're going to see other efforts to communicate the astronaut experience to the world. And I want to talk just briefly about that. The overview effect is a message to humanity from the universe. And it's a message about who we are and our future in the universe. It's not about me. It's not about Jeff Hoffman. It's not about Ron Garan. It's not about any of us individually, but it's about all of us together. That is the essence of the message. And some of the early astronauts saw it very clearly. The first person to experience the overview effect, Yuri Gagarin, said, "It was not the distance, but the principle." Humanity had overcome the bonds of gravity and gone out into space. Not Yuri Gagarin had gone into space, but humanity. And Rusty Schweickart, Apollo 9 astronaut, said, "You're out there on the forefront, and that brings a responsibility. You have to share it. You have to bring it back." And when I say that, I say you, because it's not me. It's not John Glenn. It's not the astronauts. It's we. It's us. It's life that had this experience. So that's the essence of it. I just briefly want to say three things about decoding the message. Some of the things we've come to understand. One, you've heard it before, no borders and boundaries when you see the Earth from a distance. You see it as a whole, and one of the things the astronauts talk about is it's really beautiful. It's a whole system, and we need to begin thinking of it in that way. And we need to begin to understand what it means. Many of the astronauts had a shift in identity from identifying with places on the Earth to identifying with the Earth itself. Many of them say we're all in this together. We have to work together. Second, as Ron Garan would say, it's a fragile oasis. There's a strong ecological or environmental component to this experience. And I thought about this. If you came across an oasis in a desert and there was palm trees and water, you wouldn't trash it and destroy it. You'd take care of it because you don't want to end up in the desert. And the Earth, as many astronauts have said, is a place that supports human life in a universe that isn't totally friendly to human life. So we need to take care of that Earth. Third, my friend David Beaver, who's here, co-founder of the Overview Institute, always emphasizes we not only see the Earth from space, but in space. And we begin to realize that we're on a spaceship. Bucky Fuller called it Spaceship Earth. We're the crew. We need to work well together as the crew of Spaceship Earth. I don't know if you've ever thought about this before, but you're an astronaut. You're on a spacecraft. The difference between you and Ron Garan and Jeff Hoffman is they've gone away and they've seen this reality which they know experientially and we know intellectually. But it's really the same thing. In a way, we're all astronauts. And finally, the experience and the message and the communication of the message, which we'll talk about tonight, is different. And that's what I was talking about with the book, with the film. We're trying to find more and more ways to communicate to the whole world what Ron and Jeff and other astronauts know. And communicating that message is a really critical time. It is happening at a very critical time for our planet and our species. So it's not a minor thing to do. It's an important thing to do. So I just want to conclude by saying a couple of things. One is some of my friends at work, we were talking about this big event tonight, and I said, it would be kind of weird, wouldn't it, if the Mayan calendar, which has predicted the end of the world on December 21st, were off by 2 weeks. And actually, the world is going to end when we show this film. The exits are that way, incidentally. I don't think that's going to happen, but you may find that it will be the end of your current worldview, because that's what this is all about. That's what the Overview Institute is trying to do, Planetary Collective, the astronauts. We're trying to communicate that shift in worldview that happens when you see the planet from orbit or from the moon. And that is what the film Overview is about. That is what you're going to be seeing tonight. And I'd like to introduce Guy Reed, director of the film, to tell you a little bit about it. Thanks.
Good evening. The planet is in crisis. When we hear that, often our response is what and how. What can we do about it? How can we fix it? And these questions, while important, usually overwhelm the most profound and overlooked question. It's the question that discloses the root cause of our situation. Why? Why are we behaving in the way we are? It's the why that reveals our motivations. It's the why that reveals our intentions. And most importantly, it's the why that reveals our worldview. When astronauts look out the window, they don't see the economy. They barely see human society, vast as it is. They see the biosphere. They see the primary system. They see our primary reference point, the planet. So with this in mind, we understand that humans, us, we're a subsystem within the planetary system. And that in turn we've created another subsystem, human society, and in turn society has created another subsystem, the economy. Yet our primary reference point, the thing that our society holds most dear, tends to always be our economy, which in reality, according to our Earth-gazing astronauts, is a wholly owned subsidiary of the biosphere. So there's something in this. It's not to say that the human constructs of society and our economy are not important or valuable. Of course they are. It's just that with this perspective, with this overview, we can begin to see the way things really are. Biosphere, society, economy. And actually, we've got it all upside down. Because we talk about the biosphere, this beautiful planet of ours, as a resource. But a resource of what? Well, it's the economy, stupid. So it appears that we've neglected that which is primary. One environmental philosopher, Joanna Macy, she refers to this as the Great Turning, the turning from an industrial growth society based on our economy being the primary reference point, to a life-sustaining society based on our biosphere being our primary reference point. And we need to now start thinking about the latter. Planetary Collective was founded with this in mind: to find ways to point to what our actual situation is, to point to this non-apparent reality, using non-invasive, non-prescriptive techniques, one of them being film, in order to bring people back to the why. Why are we behaving like this? I loved dinosaurs when I was younger. I thought I could name all of them. I had dinosaur wallpaper, dinosaur pajamas, dinosaur lunchboxes. When Jurassic Park came out, well, it was rather exciting. And recently in graduate school, I bumped into my old friends, the dinosaurs, when I came across this concept of mass extinction. During the life of our planet, we think there's been 5 mass extinctions. The last one being when my buddies, the dinosaurs, came to an end, when we think a comet hurtled towards the planet and hit the Yucatan Peninsula about 65 million years ago. But talking to some of my ecologist friends, they're seriously considering the question that we are in a mass extinction right now, the 6th mass extinction. And if you look at the increasing levels of biodiversity loss over the last few decades, it's quite sobering indeed. The only difference being that the cause of this mass extinction is not a 6-mile meteor. It's us. It's human civilization. It's our species. It's everyone in this room. We're not creating the conditions for life to flourish. We're doing precisely the opposite. And Planetary Collective, we believe that the cause of this is found in the way we see ourselves and our relationship to our world, our worldview. We see ourselves as separate from each other, from the biosphere, and from the very cosmos in which we abide. But this sense of separation is erroneous. It's a misperception. Einstein called it an optical illusion of consciousness. Even in our natural sciences, the study of phenomena is divided: cosmological evolution, chemical evolution, biological evolution, human evolution. But it's not divided at all. It's a continuum. Life is a continuum. The universe is a continuum. Our very existence is a continuum, which is actually the title of our upcoming feature documentary, featuring over 30 experts in the fields of cosmology, environmentalism, sustainability, and of course Ron Garan. We quickly realized that astronauts are the best spokesman for the reframing of our sense of who we are and what we're doing, simply because they're our modern-day heroes. They, in some respects, risk their lives. They venture into somewhere none of us have been, and they come back and they tell us, hey, we're all here together. And the planet, it's not as big as we thought. And there's nowhere else to go. Seriously. Oh, and by the way, it's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen in my life. So when we read about the overview effect, we got really excited because it's something that's actually accessible to everyone. And I think it's pointing to something far greater, something incredibly profound. That human beings have the capacity to directly perceive this non-apparent reality of our radical interdependence, not just with each other, but with the living earth, our mother, and the cosmos itself. And it starts to redefine what it means to be human at this time of awakening to our place in the universe, and how to relate to the world around us, and more importantly, how to relate to oneself. If we're inseparable from the earth as a whole, from the totality of life, then what are we exactly? Overview is the beginning of a series of films we're producing that point to this emerging worldview, a worldview that we believe is necessary for the emergence of a peaceful planetary culture, which is imperative not just for the survival of our own species, but for the survival of a countless number of species who are now inextricably bound to our own collective decision-making. We travelled the world making both films. In 18 months, we covered 100,000 miles. We went around the planet twice, literally. 50 cities, 20 countries. We met countless people. And one thing that strikes me, which is contrary to popular opinion, is people's basic goodness, people's basic sanity. We've been treated incredibly well. And I think a lot of it is when we tell people what we're doing. We're making a film about astronauts talking about how beautiful the planet looks like from space. Everyone we told was fascinated, whether they were Japanese, Mexican, Indonesian, Russian. They all looked at us and they all felt this deep recognition. I think it's in the potential lying dormant within human consciousness that affords a deeper perception of interdependence, that allows us to see the Earth as a single, whole, dynamic system. And really it's down to the brilliance and bravery of men and women who venture into space and come home and tell us this message. Men like Jeff Hoffman and Ron Garan, who I want to personally thank for being here today and for being in our film. And I'd like to thank all of you for taking the time to watch it. So, no further delays, here is Overview. Thank you.
In 1968, Apollo 8 went to the moon. They didn't land, but they did circle the moon. And I was watching it on television, and at a certain point, one of the astronauts casually said, "We're going to turn the camera around and show you the Earth." And he did. And that was the first time I had ever seen the planet hanging in space like that. And it was profound.
I think that for me, like for many other people, it was quite a shock. I don't think any of us had any expectations about how it would give us such a different perspective. I think the focus had been, we're going to the stars, we're going to the other planets, and suddenly we look back at ourselves, and it seems to imply a new kind of self-awareness.
One of the astronauts said, when we originally went to the moon, our total focus was on the moon. We weren't thinking about looking back at the Earth. But now that we've done it, that may well have been the most important reason we went.
Oh, golly, I remember going through launch, which is an overwhelming experience. The engines cut off. I felt myself floating out of the seat. I floated over to the window, looked out, and we were coming up over the coast of Africa. And that's when it hit me. I'm in space. And, you know, I just got incredibly excited because it's something I had dreamed about since I was 6 years old.
I think you start out with this idea of what it's going to be like. And then when you do finally look at the Earth for the first time, you're overwhelmed by how much more beautiful it really is when you see it for real. It's just like it's this dynamic, alive place that you see glowing all the time.
It was truly incredible to be up there, doing what I always wanted to do my whole life, and then to kind of glance back at our planet and see that view was just tremendous.
I can only describe what I've seen. You know, looking down at the Earth and you see that line that separates day into night slowly moving across the planet. Thunderstorms on the horizon casting these long shadows as the sun sets. And then watching the Earth come alive. And you see the lights from the cities and the towns.
The events you see from space, like flying over thunderstorms, looking at them from the top, were spectacular. Like a fireworks show going on, and you're looking at it from the very top.
You know, shooting stars going below us, or you know, dancing curtains of auroras. It's just very hard to describe all the, you know, the colors, the beauty, the motion.
My job as lunar module pilot was to be responsible for the lunar module itself and responsible for the science on the moon. So when we started home, I had a little more time to look out the window than the other guys because most of my responsibilities were completed. We were in a particular mode called the barbecue mode. So we were flying like this and rotating like that. What that caused to happen was every 2 minutes, a picture of the Earth, the moon, the sun, and a 360-degree panorama of the heavens appeared in the spacecraft window. And I had studied astronomy, and I had studied cosmology, and fully understood that the molecules in my body, and the molecules in my partner's bodies, and in the spacecraft, had been prototyped in some ancient generation of stars. In other words, it was pretty obvious from those descriptions we're stardust. Well, that was pretty awesome and powerful, particularly since I had a little more time at this point to be reflective and to think about it.
Awe, I think, is one of those words that you have a better understanding of once you see it, too. I felt like, you know, using the word awesome was totally appropriate when it came to describing what the planet looks like.
To have that experience of awe is, at least for the moment, to let go of yourself, to transcend the sense of separation. So it's not just that they were experiencing something other than them, but that they were at some very deep level integrating, realizing their interconnectedness with that beautiful blue-green ball.
And this is why the astronauts, particularly in the International Space Station, often say that much of their free time is filled with what they call Earth gazing, just staring out at the Earth. They can stare for hours because the changing scenery, the interactivity of the biosphere, all of this has an incredible aesthetic impact.
The beauty of seeing Earth as a planet as opposed to being down here among it is a wonderful experience to then start to get into what we call the big picture effect or the overview effect.
I was flying cross country from the East Coast to the West Coast in the 1970s, and I was looking out the window. And as I was looking down at the planet, the thought came to me, anyone living in a space settlement or living on the moon would always have an overview. They would see things that we know, but we don't experience, which is that the Earth is one system, we're all part of that system, and that there is a certain unity and coherence to it all. And I immediately called it the overview effect.
You do, from that perspective, see the Earth as a planet. You see the sun as a star. We see the sun in the blue sky, but up there you see the sun in a black sky. So yeah, you are seeing it from a cosmic perspective.
We've been evolving from the beginning of civilization to a larger and larger perspective of life on the Earth. But the next natural evolution is understanding the life in space. That is, the fact that the Earth as Buckminster Fuller used to famously say, is a spaceship Earth. We are in space already. It's just that we haven't brought that into our perspective as we live here on Earth. The overview effect is simply the sudden recognition that we live on a planet and all the implications that it brings to life on Earth.
When we look down at the Earth from space, we see this amazing, indescribably beautiful planet. It looks like a living, breathing organism, but it also, at the same time, looks extremely fragile.
Because you go outside on a clear day and it's the big blue sky, and it's like it goes on forever, right? And how could we possibly, put enough stuff into it to fill it up with things that really change it? And yet, you see it from space, and it's this thin line which is just barely hugging the surface of the planet.
Anybody else who's ever gone to space says the same thing, because it really is striking and it's really sobering to see this paper-thin layer and to realize that that little paper-thin layer is all that protects every living thing on Earth from death, basically, from the harshness of space.
There's this very poetic concept that a lot of people express, that there are no boundaries from space. And I've heard a lot of my astronaut colleagues say that. Unfortunately, it's not true. You do see boundaries. They're mostly the result of human impact. You can see erosion, clear-cutting of forests, and it's a long litany of environmental impact that we've had on our planet. And that's something which, when you see it from a cosmic perspective, makes you really appreciate the concept of Spaceship Earth, and that we're all here together.
After I came back and tried to understand what this experience was all about, I could find nothing in the science literature about it, and nothing in the religious literature that I looked at. So I turned to the local university and asked them to help me with what I saw. And when they came back to me a few weeks later and said, well, in the ancient literature, we found a description called Salvakapa Samadhi. And they said that means that you see things as you see them with your eyes, but you experience them emotionally and viscerally, as with ecstasy and a sense of total unity and oneness. And I said, well, that's exactly what the experience was. And so it's rather clear to me as I study this, it wasn't anything new, but was something that was very important to the way we humans were put together.
Many of the great wisdom traditions of the earth have pointed to what we're calling the overview effect. That is to say, they have realized this unity, this oneness of all life on earth and of consciousness and awareness.
Within the Western tradition, I think it's quite new and quite shocking, because there's been much more of a sense of separation. But if you look at other non-Western cultures, especially in Asia, the emphasis on those has always been on realization that the self and the world are not separate from each other, but that they're really interconnected, that the individual self and the species as a whole is a manifestation of the larger whole.
As you go into your mind in a contemplative way, the sense of the living reality of the planet becomes obvious. You become more in tune with the natural world. This is very akin to the direct perception that the astronauts have. So it's no wonder that many people have likened the overview effect to a spiritual or meditative experience, although it's not exactly that. It's a cognitive shift that very often can produce a kind of meditative experience.
I'm sure we all interpret it somewhat differently. I know some of the fellows go right to a religious explanation. I didn't. I went to more science explanation. And I think all that's wonderful. That's what it takes to build a civilization.
this view of the Earth from space, the whole Earth perspective, I think is the true symbol of this age. And I believe that what's going to happen is there's going to be a greater and greater interest in communicating this idea, because after all, it's key to our survival. We have to start acting as one species with one destiny. We are not going to survive if we don't do that.
We're seeing very clearly that if the Earth becomes sick, then we become sick. If the Earth dies, then we're going to die. People sense that something's wrong, but they're still struggling to go back and find out what the real roots of the problem are. And I think what we need to come to is a realization that it's not just fixing an economic or political system, but it's a basic worldview, a basic understanding of who we are that's at stake.
And a part of that is to come up with a new story, a new picture, a new way to approach this, and to shift our behaviors in such a way that it leads to a sustainable approach to our civilization as opposed to a destructive approach.
It is a fragile planet, and if we don't take care of it and we don't work together, then we are going to have bigger issues than we have now down the road.
On a grand scale, that's, we're basically all living in this one ecosystem called Earth. And everything that you do on one side of the ecosystem affects the other side. And that is a new way for living for most of humanity.
We humans are responsible for ourselves, and if we are endangering our future, then we've got to learn how to do it differently and to go forward into a sustainable period. And right now, that seems very difficult to see how it's going to be, but we've got to work on it.
When I was above the space station, looking down at the space station, looking down at the, against the Earth, and seeing this, amazing accomplishment, I was thinking, wow, there was 15 nations that worked together to build this amazing orbital complex in space. And if we can, take these 15 nations and do this amazing accomplishment, imagine what we can do by working together, by setting aside our differences for a common goal to overcome some of the challenges facing our planet.
We have this connection to Earth. I mean, it's our home. And I don't know how you can come back and not, in some way be changed. It may be subtle. You see differences in, different people in the just general response when they come back from space. But I think collectively, everybody has that emblazoned on their memories, the way the planet looks. You can't take that lightly. It really, you realize that you've been blessed by the opportunity to see that.
It really does look like this beautiful oasis out in the middle of nothingness. And if you have a chance for your eyes to adjust and you can actually see the stars in the Milky Way, it's this oasis against the backdrop of infinity, of this just, enormous universe behind it. And it's, really a very moving experience to be able to see that with your eyes.
You look back at it, and it's placed perfectly from the sun to take care of us, and you kind of take that reverse role on about, okay, well, we need to be taking care of it too, so that it can continue to do that for us. And I don't know how you can't have a greater appreciation for it after you see it that way.
we're going to have a short panel discussion followed by Q&A. And I'm going to start with former astronaut Jeff Hoffman. Jeff actually has a Harvard affiliation and PhD in astrophysics. And he is a veteran of 5 shuttle flights. He also was NASA's representative to the European Space Agency. I interviewed Jeff probably around 1985 when I was writing the Overview Effect, and I said to NASA, I need to interview all the astronauts about the Overview Effect. And NASA said, we'll give you 2. They gave me Jeff. Certainly worth many, many interviews, and we've been keeping up with each other ever since. So first, Jeff, I just found out this tie is special. Could you tell us why?
Well, we don't have enough time to go into the whole story, but my second space flight was an astronomy mission, and there were actually 4 PhD astronomers on board, which was pretty extraordinary in itself. But we decided to give an astronomy lesson to some middle school students back on Earth. And I was thinking, how can we start this off, get their attention, show them that, we're really up in space, something is different. Well, I realized that at that time, all of the male teachers that I had had back in those days, they all wore ties, and I thought, wouldn't it be neat? I'll wear a tie, and, the first thing that will happen is the tie will be floating up in space like this. And so this tie was specially made for space. Got a little astronaut here, which is covered up by the microphone, but that's exactly what happened, and I'm told that all the students laughed when they saw it, and that got us off to a good start.
So this tie has been in orbit and returned. On a more philosophical note, it's been many years now since you've flown, but you did have a number of flights. I'm curious, how does your recollection of the experience change? Does it become more intense? Do you see new aspects to it? Does it begin to fade? What is your experience after several years of not being in orbit?
Well, of course, when we first talked and you interviewed me, I had only had 1 space flight. That was after my first back in 1985. And the experience deepens, as with many things. You listen to a great piece of music the first time, you're overwhelmed by it, but if it's truly a great piece of music, the more you listen to it, you hear new things, there's new dimensions that open up to you, and I think that's the way it is with spaceflight. And in fact, by the time I was making my 5th and what turned out to be my final space flight, I got great pleasure actually from seeing the rookies on the flight go through the same, oh wow, isn't that incredible, that sort of thing that I had on my first flight. Not that I was jaded, because it was just as spectacular, and people who have been in space for over a year, the experience continues to deepen. I never got tired of looking out the window. I never got tired of waking up every morning and realizing, wow, I'm in space. And it is a totally different experience. And since flying, I guess the only really biggest change psychologically is, while I was an active astronaut, I never dreamed of being in space. After I stopped flying, I started to have dreams that I was back in space, which I think was indicative of how much it had affected my psyche. And, people say, do I miss it? Sure. How can you not? I mean, it's a spectacular experience. You can't do it forever. I've been fortunate in being able to do other things. After my European experience, I'm now a professor at MIT. I'm living here in Boston, which I love. But there is that memory. Unfortunately, the 2 greatest parts of the personal experience in space, and of course NASA doesn't send us into space so that we can have transcendental personal experiences. They send us up to do useful work, which we all do. I've done plenty of useful work up there, but we all are privileged to have those personal experiences, the two parts of which are the visual experience of looking back on the planet. And I'm glad to say that as photographic technology has gotten better and better, the ability to share that experience has also improved. I think we'll hear more about that from Doug later. But the physical experience of losing all your weight, of being able to float, I wish I could bring it back, but you can't. And it's because it's so unique, and it is truly a fundamentally different state of being. People have said that about going underwater. Anybody who's scuba dived, there is that fundamental different environment. So it's a fundamentally different place that we are. I can't bring back the physical feeling, but I certainly remember how unique and how ecstatic it was. But I can remember what it looked like, and that's, I think, partly what the overview effect is about, and the feelings that we had about the Earth. And those, they mature with time. And of course, back when I first started flying, people were not yet talking about global warming, long-term climate change. So I think what we really have seen, and I'll finish with this, is I often talk to students, being an astronomer by background, I like to compare the solar system, or the universe for that matter, as we know it now, to what I knew back when I was in school, when Jupiter had 12 satellites, of which they were only just points of light. And now we have dozens of objects which our space probes have shown us the surface. We live in a far richer perception of the solar system, and the pictures that Hubble and some of its the other great space telescopes have opened up vistas of the universe, which we never had when I was young. But I think along with that is that the Earth is now one of those planets. So we look at the surface of Mars, we look at Venus, we look at Mercury, Jupiter, and we can look at the Earth in that way and realize that we are a planet, which, of course, we've been talking about in the overview film. And that continues to deepen and become richer as time goes on.
Thanks, Jeff. I think two areas of further research are the dreams, which you and I talked about actually in Houston, but also the other aspect, which is somewhat neglected sometimes, is to realize as you're looking at the Earth from a distance, you're also floating. You're weightless. And that is a fundamentally different reality. Ron Garan is an active astronaut, recently spent 6 months on the International Space Station. He is a test pilot and fighter pilot by prior training, and now an active NASA astronaut. I can't even begin to tell you all the things Ron has done as a result of his experience. He's founded Fragile Oasis, a website I urge everyone to take a look at. He has founded an organization called Unity Node, which is working to make a difference on the planet. And again, Ron is really following that advice that Rusty Schweikert talked about, a responsibility to share and do something with the experience. And Ron and I have talked about this, and I just want to pose it to you. When you were there looking back and you saw the beauty of the Earth, and you also had that realization at the same time that there were people struggling, that there were people without water, there were people who were not doing well, and as Guy talked about, issues that are obviously important to our future. Why is it, do you think, that we're having such a hard time taking this understanding of our unity and not realizing it on the surface of the planet?
Yeah. Well, when I launched on my first mission, I think I launched with this belief that we have a responsibility to lead the planet a little better. So I don't think that was a cognitive shift. But what did hit me was that sobering contradiction, the contradiction between the beauty of our planet on the one hand and the unfortunate realities of life on our planet. And over the course of that 2-week mission, that really did sink in. On my second mission, I had a few years to think about that and a few years to process that experience. And I did a lot of research and I did a lot of soul searching to figure out, what the story is there. And what came of that is a belief. And I launched into space the second time with a belief that we have all the resources and we have all the technology necessary to solve the problems we all face. But I also launched into space with the question of, if we do that, if we have all the resources, we have all the technology, why do we still face so many critical issues? And after spending a half a year in space, and really with every free moment, I have, as David points out, looking back at the Earth, I did a lot of thinking about that. I really wanted to see if I could figure out, what is that reason? Why is that that we still face so many problems despite our ample technology and our ample resources? And again, I wouldn't call it an epiphany, but I'd like to. The only way I could describe it is maybe an epiphany in slow motion. Over the course of months and months, and what really dawned on me, and I really think this is the primary reason why we still face so many problems, is in our inability to effectively collaborate on a global scale. Our inability to set aside our differences and work together towards our common goals. And there's a great number of movements out there now that have realized that and are trying to implement that. Open source movements and movements designed to reduce corruption and things like that. And I think we're seeing a big shift in that right now. And I truly believe that open, transparent collaboration is going to be an economic engine. It's going to be something that fuels tremendous economic growth and also helps us save the planet and solve a lot of the problems we're facing. And I think that because of this economic growth, because of this economic engine, people who are engaging in unhealthy competition and corruption and the like are going to see themselves being left behind, and we'll have to take on a much more collaborative and cooperative mindset in order to keep up with that economic growth. And I think that age is just starting to dawn, and it's just starting to be realized. And the duplication of effort that exists, the misuse of resources. When we collaborate and we do it in an open, transparent way, the solutions are better by eliminating or reducing those duplication of efforts, of leading to better accountability and fostering trust. And I think one of the main things, as you're sitting there, you're looking at the planet, and it really is very, very obvious that we are all in it together, and that this is the only home that we have, and we have to take care of it, and we need to the boundaries shrink and the borders shrink, and especially when you're in an international crew, and looking down at the Earth and or looking down at the space station against the Earth and realizing that we did this together. A lot of these nations weren't, or some of the nations weren't always the best of friends throughout the years, and how we could become one crew, really, not just in word or just truly one crew with one mission. It really is a very, very powerful thing, and I think it can be applied to a lot of the things we're doing here.
The thought comes to mind of a crew of 7 billion people. It's pretty awesome. Awesome metaphor, but as you said, years ago, nobody could have imagined we'd build a space station. Nobody could have imagined people from 15 different nations could work together there. So,
especially the U.S. and the Russians.
Right, especially the U.S. and the Russians.
And I launched on a Russian rocket. My second flight was on a Russian rocket on the 50th anniversary of Yuri Gagarin's first flight from the same pad that he launched from in a previously, top secret base on a Russian rocket with an American flag on it with 2 Russian colleagues.
Right.
That was unthinkable, not very long ago.
So you launched on April the 12th.
Very close.
My first flight was April the 12th also.
Right.
Great day for space flights.
It's a very important day. Well, the title of this series is Freethink, and much of what we're talking about here is thinking in new ways. So that's something that I think Jeff and Ron are saying is possible. About 500 people, give or take a few, have actually had this experience. Of course, we're looking at a future of commercial spaceflight where hundreds, maybe thousands more will have it. But then there's also the question of can we reproduce this experience with technology without actually putting people into orbit? Doug Trumbull has worked on films that have really changed people's lives. 2001, Blade Runner, Close Encounters of the Third Kind. He also wrote and directed his own film, Deep Running, which is a classic environmental film. And my question to Doug is, do you see any way with the technology that you're looking at in film and in simulation and immersive experiences, is there a way we could really experience what Jeff and Ron experienced, or how close can we get without actually going there?
I think there is, and I think we're actually very close to it right now. And I'll just give you a little of my history is that I grew up loving science fiction as a kid. So I'm like in my head, I'm in space all the time. Alien planets and weird cultures and Heinlein and Clark and Asimov and all these guys are really thinking big. And so at a very early age, I started turning into an artist. And so my portfolio was filled with spacecraft and alien planets. And I got a job working for a little studio in Hollywood that was doing simulations for NASA that were, I think there was probably internally used films to get senators to give money to NASA to go to the moon, that kind of thing. So I was doing vertical assembly buildings and Saturn V rockets and lunar landers, way before we actually went to the moon. And so that was kind of my life. And then one of the jobs we got was for the New York World's Fair that was in 1964, and it was called To the Moon and Beyond. And it was a trip into space. It was a movie projected into this planetarium dome. So it wasn't a planetarium show, it was a movie that was all around you, and you're immersed in this movie. And it was a trip into space, and really a kind of a trip into infinity. It kind of went like from the Big Bang to the multiverse in 15 minutes. And Stanley Kubrick and Arthur Clarke saw that film at the World's Fair and hired our company to work on 2001. So that's kind of led to my job working on 2001. I'm this precocious 23-year-old kid, wannabe movie maker. And it turned out to just be one of the most fabulous experiences of my life because it was carrying on this history that had been started by Cinerama. And if you've ever seen Cinerama, it was this amazing film medium that originally was 3 projectors and 3 cameras, but it became 70 millimeter. But they had theaters all over the world. At that time, there were maybe 50 or 60 of these big theaters with these gigantic 90-foot wide movie screens. And that was the way 2001 was shown. And Kubrick recognized that the medium itself was so powerful that he didn't need to tell the story so much. He wanted the audience to have the experience of being in space as much as possible within the confines of the medium. And so he said, well, I'm going to get out of the way. I'm not going to use my normal over-the-shoulder shots and reverse angles and pure delay or whatever. We're going to just go into space and go on this trip. And the movie became known as The Ultimate Trip. And so, there's a long story after that, but over the years, I keep getting approached by people, particularly in situations like this at universities and things, where I find physicists, astronomers, technology people who say, I saw that movie when I was 6 years old and it just changed my life. That's why I'm in what I do. So that's when I started realizing that the medium of film is extremely powerful and it pervades the entire planet. And if you want to get a message to those X number of billion people out there, movies are a really cool way to do it. So over the years, I've been messing with movies, but I've also been messing with the medium of movies and how could we make it bigger and better. And I was very disappointed that we kind of multiplexed ourselves into small screens, and then television really became a very powerful medium. And I was very disappointed that it didn't continue to be this giant palette that we had in those days. And so I made it my mission to try to be involved in projects that would allow me to experiment with film and different kinds of film formats and different kinds of lenses and different kinds of projectors and screens and I started developing this idea of higher frame rates. This was 35 years ago. I developed a process called ShowScan, which was 70 millimeter film on giant screens like that, projected at 60 frames a second instead of 24. And I realized that by increasing the frame rate, the surface of the screen seemed to disappear, even though it wasn't 2D. I mean, it wasn't 3D. It was just 2D. But the shuttering and the blurring and the strobing and the grain of the film all disappeared, and suddenly the screen became like a window onto reality. And everybody reported this, and it was very powerful. So that kind of continued my quest to find this kind of holy grail of the uber film technology where I could tell a story where, for all intents and purposes, the audience is actually in the movie, not looking at the movie. And so if you can imagine, even in a situation like this, it's not a good situation, and this is a relatively modestly sized screen, but from you sitting out there, if the screen was as big as this entire wall, you could imagine that you would have a sense of immersion, particularly if we were orbiting the Earth and it was that movie 100 times bigger. So I've been developing a digital technology recently that is really my quest to bring together my world of science fiction, because I want to develop a feature film that tells this story in a very dramatic and powerful way. And Avatar actually touched on it a little bit. And Avatar, you have to say, wow, science fiction movie, special effects, and it's the most profitable movie of all time, probably seen by more people than any movie of all time. I said, well, that's how this is going to work. It was like the big breakthrough in 3D. And now I'm trying to couple a story about the future of mankind in the universe with this medium. That's my mission right now, trying to do it. I'm also on the board of Stewart Observatory in Arizona. So I hang out with a lot of astronomers, and I'm very fascinated with all this amazing stuff that's happening. It's not just low Earth orbit, it's the Cassini mission, it's the Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter, it's Curiosity rover, it's Cassini. I mean, it's just all these amazing things that are extending our perception of what the universe is really like. And I want my camera to be there. And I want to bring it here and put it on a screen. So that's kind of my big mission in life. And it's just a real honor to be here with guys who actually got to do what I never got to do. So it's happening. We're only a few months away from some pretty amazing breakthrough experiments on a very big, deeply curved screen. And I'm working at 120 frames a second in 3D at very high brightness, very high resolution. And the screen does become a window. And so the next thing is to start shooting some film tests and say, well, what kind of a story can you tell in a medium like that? What do you do with it when the relationship between the audience and the movie becomes seamless?
I hope it won't take 25 years,
Yeah.
but I hope and would imagine we might all gather and see this film or your film using that technology. It would be great.
Yeah.
Personally, I still want to go into orbit
Yeah,
directly,
I do too.
Well, the
but
thing
I'd love
is,
to do that.
No matter how good, I mentioned this briefly, the visual experience is powerful. We're very visual creatures, so to be able to share these visual experiences is overwhelmingly important. But nevertheless, this feeling of the freedom of weightlessness, this extraordinary condition of the human body, I don't think, at least currently, we don't have any virtual reality that can quite create that.
Right.
It would be great. I mean, people come to NASA sometimes and they say, "Where's your weightless room?" You know, they somehow have the idea that you can just switch off gravity, which would be great. I mean, I always tell student audiences, anybody who can figure that out, come and talk to us. And NASA really wants to hear about it. But you know, we do have the parabolic airplanes, which for 20 or 30 seconds can create true weightlessness. And there now is a commercial company out there that offers flights, and it's far less than a trip to orbit. I don't work for the company. I don't get any feedback, but I know many people who have been on those flights, and even in those 20 seconds, just the very first time that you experience weightlessness,
it is a life-changing experience. You'll never again think of weight and your body and gravity in the same way.
But one of the we were talking about this in the green room, was one of the closest experiences I've ever had to that was a sensory isolation tank, where, I don't know if you're familiar with what that is, but you're in a very temperature-controlled solution of salts so that you float very high in the water. It's completely dark and there's no sound and no light. And I lost all sense of physicality. I felt that I became pure consciousness. But the only thing I saw was what was in my head. But the interesting thing was that if my eyes were open, what was in my head was real. If my eyes were closed, what was in my head was my imagination.
And I've had that experience in space, as we discussed, because floating free, and if you get your body into a state of pure, total relaxation, which you're not always totally relaxed, but I learned to work at it, and it's that same feeling of you lose your body. And I don't know if you've ever had that. A few of my colleagues have experienced. I first experienced it by accident. I was just floating in front of the window listening to music, and I was getting more and more relaxed. And all of a sudden it was like this cocoon enveloped my body, and I no longer was aware of my body. But my eyes could stay open. That was maybe the difference. And I was just watching the earth go by as a pure consciousness. It was really extraordinary.
I'm really envious.
I'm sorry.
Okay.
Go ahead. I wish we could keep this going, but then we wouldn't have any Q&A. Guy is going to come up in case there are some questions about the film itself. As you can see, reluctantly, I had to cut off an enormously interesting conversation here. It's just the beginning of what this phenomenon, is really all about. There's so much more to know. We've only just begun. So we are going to have questions and answers from the audience here, from those who are watching out there. I believe that the information was given earlier about how to communicate by Twitter or Facebook. I remember it's #overview and then a long, complicated URL for Facebook, but hopefully you've got it. And if you're here in the hall and you'd like to come to the microphones, identify yourself and please direct your question to one of our panelists. Sir.
Goodness, that quickly. Well, first of all, thank you so much for this program. This is fantastic. Thank you so much, all of you, for what you're contributing to spreading this information. My name is Jerry Salfin. I'm from UMass Dartmouth and from the Center for Indic Studies, where we do a lot of Vedic and Hindu studies. And it occurs to me, I'm fascinated by the fact that you mentioned the overview experience is not something new. You find it in ancient cultures. And it occurs to me that in the Hindu tradition, there is a preparation that's, it seems to me, quite similar to what astronauts have to go through, of physical, mental, and spiritual development. That is a prerequisite for going into space or for going into outer space in the yogic way. And I'd love to hear your comments on this, all of you. That is, to what degree, I mean, does this sound like, did you have any yogic training, for example, in the preparation? To what extent does the prerequisite activities of your development of your physical, mental, spiritual self, spiritual in the way that you become part of a group, that is, you commit yourself to something larger than yourself in becoming an astronaut. So all these things, it seem to me, are very, very similar to the ancient traditions in terms of facilitating what will then become an overview experience. And I'm just curious to know what you think about that.
Boy, there were numerous questions there. I'll try to answer just maybe two. I think maybe one of the big differences in astronaut training from what you refer to as the training in the Hindu tradition is that people in that tradition were training to produce certain mental as well as physical experiences and spiritual experiences. Our training is clearly not aimed at that direction. Our training is very highly technical, aimed at allowing us to manage very complex systems. There's also a lot of physical training involved when you're going to learn how to use a spacesuit, do a spacewalk, learn how to operate robotic equipment. And so I think that part is different. I will relate one experience since you mentioned yoga. Nowadays, up on the space station, they have some very sophisticated exercise equipment. Ron can probably talk more about that if the occasion allows. But in the early days of the shuttle, we had kind of a primitive treadmill, but that was about it. And your muscles kind of get they're not used in the right way. And we did at one point have a yoga teacher come in and show us some exercises that could be done without any equipment and without gravity, of course, because you can't use gravity as an assistance in your exercises. So that was kind of neat. Again, it was not done for spiritual purposes. It was much more oriented towards our physical well-being. As I said, you had many questions. We could talk about it for the whole evening, but we better go on.
Ron, did you have any thoughts about the training as a producer of the experience?
Yeah, as Jeff said, we train to get the job done, and it's very specific. And everything else is a personal experience. And so, there's certainly nothing that NASA provides along those realms.
I think we sort of provide it for each other.
Right,
the way it happens.
Yeah. So, like Jeff said, the old heads are bringing the rookies along and telling them what to expect and that sort of thing, preparing them mentally. But that's, spiritually, I think, they say there's no atheists in foxholes. Of course, that's not true, but you could make the same argument against no atheists on the launch pad either. Again, that's not true. But I think strapping 4.5 million pounds of explosives to your back, makes you think about what you're doing. And I think one of the preparations for being able to do that is really understanding and really believing that what you're doing is important and making a difference. And yeah, it's probably going to be fun and it's going to be thrilling, but if you're doing it for that reason, you're doing it for the wrong reason. And I think, there is a lot of mental and spiritual preparation that goes into, launch and doing spacewalks and all those things that really put you out there, and different people relate to that differently. And, people ask me, did I have some kind of shift in my in whether I believed in God or anything like that, and my faith was very strong when I launched, and what I experienced only reaffirmed that and strengthened that, I think.
As you both said, and that was a great question. There's so much we could say, but then nobody else would get to ask a question. So, sir, what was your question?
Hi, I'm Doc Searles. I'm with the project at the Berkman Center here at Harvard. I want to ask Ron, are you one of the guys that were in the extravehicular floating around like a satellite of your own?
No.
There.
No.
I was going to ask what that experience was like to be out there on your own, or if you could relate to what other people may have gone through with that, because it seems to me being a single human being floating outside in space.
I can actually say something about that. When I was working on the rescue of the Hubble Space Telescope, we were riding on the end of the manipulator arm, which is about 50 feet long, floating up at the top of the telescope. Now, I was hooked to the arm by a stainless steel tether, but I don't think I talked about this while it was happening because it's not quite proper technique, but from time to time we actually had installed some equipment, and then we had about 10 minutes where we had to wait for the mission control to check it out that it was all working correctly. And so I just let go. And of course, I'm a physicist.
You are one of those guys.
I'm in orbit. I'm not gonna fall down. I'm not gonna float away. But nevertheless, when you're actually holding on to something that's much more massive than you, whether it's the space station or the shuttle, that's your reference point. As soon as I let go, I not only physically, but there was this psychological change. I became an independent floating satellite. And what was really neat was then I could turn my back to the shuttle so that all I was looking at was space and the Earth, and particularly at night when it was, I'd see the stars above and the Earth below, and I was just floating, and there was no shuttle, no Hubble telescope. It was like being lost in space, except I knew I could get back, so I wasn't worried about it. So that was really it was an amazing psychological transformation when I just let go. And I'm sure, when you're free floating, Bruce McCandless and some of his experiences when he was out, hundreds of yards away from the shuttle was probably even stronger than that.
I've got an interesting story about that too. On my first mission, I did 3 spacewalks, and in each of those, it was my first time in space, and it was somewhat overwhelming, and I would have this experience of seeing how just incredible and beautiful everything was. That was one part of my brain. The other part of my brain was saying, yeah, it's really beautiful, but it's not real. Part of me couldn't accept that. Fast forward a couple of years, I'm on the space station. I've been on there for 3 or 4 months, and I'm doing a spacewalk, and it definitely felt real. But there was one time where I was on the end of the space station's robotic arm, and this was the last space shuttle mission, and we were going to take a failed piece of equipment. It weighed 1,400 pounds, and I was going to grab it in my hands with my feet clamped to the station's robotic arm, and that was going to swing me into the payload bay of Space Shuttle Atlantis, and I would install it in there. But in this maneuver to get me from the space station into the space shuttle, at one point during the maneuver, just like Jeff said, I had no reference of the space station. I had no reference of Earth. I just had blackness. I couldn't see anything. And the foot pedal has a mechanism in it that if it gets too much torque in it, it breaks over. It's a big, loud snap. And so I'm holding this 1,400-pound box, and you're floating inside the spacesuit. So I'm constantly rocking forward and back, and I'm trying to keep my heels from popping out because that would be really bad. And then my toes are holding me down if I'm pitching the other way. And at one point, I felt this really, really loud clank. And again, you have no perception of motion, no visual perception, so I'm thinking to myself, did the foot plate just break off the end of the arm because of this big, large box? And there'd be no way for me to know. I would have no idea that I'm hurling off into space. And so I thought to myself, well, if I was hurling off into space, somebody would probably say something. So I'm probably not hurling off into space. But then I said, well, what happens if I lost communications at the same time? But I wasn't hurling off into space. I wasn't really worried about it. But for a brief moment there, you're in the tank basically. You have you have no sensory perception of what's going on. You just know that you're somewhere in space, and you hope that everything is okay. So it really is a very, very unique experience.
Open the pod bay doors, Hal. Right? By the way, I did do the zero-G flights, and the amazing thing to me about that was that vision is so important to your sense of gravity. And even though you're looking around, you lose gravity. It's weird. As far as I got.
Thanks, Doc. Over here, sir.
The idea of eco-unity is certainly not new. Thoreau made the same point 150 years ago very eloquently without the aid of space travel. I'm wondering whether space travel really is necessary to tell us that we need to save the planet from ourselves, or whether this film is just another one of those exercises to convince senators to give more money to NASA.
Well, that was not why the film was made. You don't need space travel to convince us that bad things are happening to our planet. I mean, you're absolutely right. People have thought about this for a long time. But nevertheless, the perception that the Earth is a planet, a finite planet, I think has really taken root in human consciousness. And I think that to a large extent that has been a product of the space age and the images that have come back. And I also ought to mention that the very concept of planetary ecology, global warming, the greenhouse effect, these really came about through our study of other planets. Venus was the first planet where we really identified the greenhouse effect. When we were kids, there were pictures of Venus. It was lush jungles and dinosaurs and things. And then the radio astronomers discovered that it was hundreds of degrees, 900 degrees Fahrenheit on the surface. And that was the global warming, the climate change. So I think, the bottom line, space is not necessary, but it certainly is a powerful motivating force, the images and the perceptions that we get of the Earth as a planet. And that, I think, is a result of the space age.
Yeah, I'd like to say one thing.
Go ahead, Guy.
So my background is in sustainable development. And we decided to make the film because one of the things that's happening is that the ecological argument is getting caught up in this kind of technocratic narrative. And we're forgetting about, like what Jeff's saying, what kicked it all off, which is this profound picture of the Earth. And the thing that we found traveling the country, we went to 33 states, 20,000 miles, basically went to every major American city, is that Republican, Democrat alike, everyone listens to astronauts and everyone likes astronauts. And it's amazing. We didn't meet anyone that was anti-astronaut. And
I've met a few congressmen.
A few congressmen, right.
That's another story.
So the thing about it was that as soon as we started talking about it, whether people believed in climate change or not, whether they were, green or what have you, they switched on immediately. They said, "Oh, I get it." And for me, who's worked in sustainability for a long time, and I'm aware of the kind of ecological movement, it's amazing. You can't do that any other way. And so that was our motivation for making the film, to basically say, let's get astronauts to talk because everyone will listen to them.
We're coming close to the end, so I want to get in as many questions as I can quickly.
Hi, my name is Heidi Hurst. I'm an undergraduate in the college studying mathematics and Arabic. My question, it's been 40 years since we've sent a manned mission to the moon. The shuttle system is being retired or has been retired. My question is, what now? What advice can you give to my generation? And this is an open question for everyone.
Yeah, I actually had a Reddit AMA last night where I just, that very same question, I thought, let's see what everybody else, if you don't know it, it's an online discussion, if you will. And I asked the question, what does everybody think we should do? What should be the next human destination? And there was 2.5 million views of this discussion, and it really was a very fruitful one. And so, we're talking about commercial space and turning over low Earth orbit to commercial activities. I think that's very important because it enables the large government type of space agencies to push the envelope to go further and further. And to do those sort of things that are 30 or 40 years pay, return on investment that commercial activities can't do. And so where do we go? Do we go to an asteroid? Do we go to the moon? Do we go to Mars? I think there's compelling reasons to do all those things. Me personally, what I'd like to see is us establishing a space transportation system, which could mean setting up a base on the moon or in one of the Lagrangian points that allows us to make travel from Earth to different locations easier. We could use that as a stepping stone to go to Mars in a lot of cases. And so I think that's the direction I think we should be going. We have to make a commitment to do that. I often get asked, how long will it be before we go to Mars? We have to decide to go first, and then we'll figure out we have to decide to make the commitment.
Let's remember when President Kennedy challenged us to go to the moon, it was part of the Cold War. It was a race, and we won the race. And those of us who were excited about the exploration, the space travel part of it, we sort of assumed, this is just the first step. From here, we're going on to Mars. But Apollo, I have to say, was, in retrospect, it was never designed to be sustainable. And so I think that's the real challenge, whether it comes through government activities, commercial, or probably a partnership between the two. If there's going to be future exploration, it has to be sustainable, and ideally that means ultimately there ought to be some economic benefit or some sort of perceived public benefits coming back from it, and that's what we're still struggling with. So I don't want to try to give you a definitive answer because that answer has not yet really materialized.
Perhaps you can help come up with an answer.
Thank you.
We have a future astronaut here, perhaps?
I have a question. Well, are we alone in space, or are there aliens or something out there?
Well, you know, one of the most exciting things that's happening in astronomy these days is the discovery of planets around other stars. The first people have thought about this for centuries, but the first actual discovery of a planet around another star was only back in 1995. We now have spacecraft that are specifically designed to look for these. We know of thousands of planets, and we know enough planets to be able to do statistics. We now know that there are more planets in our galaxy than stars, which means in our galaxy alone there are hundreds of billions of planets, and we have hundreds of billions of galaxies in the universe. So, you know, do the math. And we also know that we can tell this through our telescopes. Physics and chemistry work the same no matter how far away you look in the universe. And if we believe that basically biology comes out of physics and chemistry, there almost certainly is life out there. So if you ask me, do I believe that there is other life in the universe, I would say, yes, I believe there is. But I'm a scientist, and belief is not enough. I want evidence. And that's what we're looking for now. And I think one of the most exciting things to wait for, and I don't know how long it's going to be, 5, 10, 20 years, but there are ways that we will, through more powerful telescopes, be able to detect the presence of life on some of these other planets around other stars, which is incredible when you think of it. But that will be really exciting. So stand by. You're likely to see the first detection of life before you finish school.
And I'm sorry to say that's a great opportunity and thought to end on, the possibility of contact with extraterrestrial civilizations. I'm sorry to say I've been looking at my phone. I've been getting fed questions from the internet. I'm sorry we didn't get to them. I'm sorry some people are still standing, but we are out of time. And I just want to thank our panel for coming.
Frank, I'd just like to acknowledge David Beaver, who was with us this evening. He's been on the screen. He always wears a beret, so you can always find him. And he is a principal in the Overview Institute, and he kind of keeps us all rounded up.
All right.
Thank you, David.
Thank you. And thank all of you for coming tonight, and we hope you've enjoyed the evening, and we look forward to seeing how you use this knowledge to improve life on planet Earth. Thank you.
Thank you.
I think to myself,